Hello and welcome to Unpacking Activities. The activity we're going to unpack today is a two-way spot the differences task. Each student has only one picture. The pictures are similar, but they contain some differences. And the learners have to interact in order to spot the differences. And this activity has a lot of benefits when it comes to language development because it involves a purposeful exchange of information. The students are negotiating meaning, they want to understand their partner and they want to express meaning, and they have a concrete outcome. Their goal is to find the differences. Of course, the pictures you choose make or break this activity. And unfortunately, you can't really use the pictures you find online if you search for spot the differences, not only because they tend to require vocab the students might not know, but also because the differences tend to be about very small details. When you see both pictures, you can spot those differences, but when the learners are interacting, it's very unlikely that they will describe the picture in such a detailed way. So for this activity to be successful, you need to use pictures with obvious differences. Another pitfall is that it has no situational authenticity or no real-world connection. And on a related note, it is difficult to integrate it within a content-based lesson or unit. What follow-up could you possibly do? One way to increase authenticity could be to use menus, schedules, ads, weather maps, etc. In other words, things that we could more realistically be comparing out in the real world. You could compare to restaurants, you could compare to schedules, to houses for rent, etc. You would need to create them. You cannot use two authentic menus you find online because they're going to be so completely different that the interaction then becomes very awkward. Everything they say is a difference. So you need to create them so that there's a manageable number of differences and similarities. And using menu schedules, ads, etc. instead of cartoons makes it easier for you to do a follow-up. For example, after comparing the two menus, they can decide which one sounds best for dinner. Something else you could use is family trees. And again, you would need to create them. So for example, I created these two trees with the names, ages, and professions, and so I controlled the differences between them. Another variation, which makes it a little easier for students, is to base the differences on who as opposed to what. So you would have a picture with several people doing different things, and you assign names to the various characters, and some names are the same in both pictures, but others are different. And yet another variation is to put the learners in charge of creating the pictures. For example, they can label buildings on a map, like build your own city, and then they interact with a classmate to see how many differences there are between their map and their partner's map. A similar option is to have them arrange a set of objects in a room, like the picture here, which is from Canva. And after they have arranged everything in any way they want, then they interact with a classmate. And maybe just to change it up, instead of telling them to spot the differences, you can tell them to spot the similarities. And if you're concerned that your students might not be yet able to interact in pairs, you could turn it into an input providing activity where the teacher describes the picture and the learners mark the differences. A couple of things I would not recommend are: first, having learners work together to spot the differences between pictures that everyone can see. If they can see both pictures, then there's no information gap between them. Everybody has the same information, and then they don't really need to work together. And second, I would not recommend asking learners to spot the differences between two written texts. If all they're doing is reading out loud, then they can spot the differences without really paying attention to meaning. And that's an issue if our goal is acquisition. Remember, we want them to make form-meaning connections. And if they can actually see both texts, then that does not contribute anything to language development because they can do that just by comparing letters. I could even do that right now in a language I don't know. All in all, spotting the differences can be a good option if we design it in a way that learners are expressing and interpreting meaning. I would suggest incorporating it maybe once or twice, mainly to add some variety to the types of activities your students do. If you have any suggestions for alternatives, please write them in the comments. Thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time.